the producers or the content owners, they don't know how valuable their content is to the platform. And I think that's where the power is. The information is power, knowledge is power, and money.
This is Global Vid, a podcast about the TV and streaming business with host Eric Lapointe. If you enjoy learning with us, subscribe here or on your favorite app. Welcome to Season 3 of the Global Vid podcast. Today we're going to kick things off and talk about tracking data in this new streaming world that we live in. Joining me will be Pola Hempowicz, the Senior Director of Content and New Business at PlumResearch. She's also a former TV executive that's worked on linear channels and streaming platforms, so she has a really good understanding as to the importance of data in order to make programming decisions. But what about the producer side of things, especially nowadays with streamers holding all of their data close to heart and not necessarily making that transparent? How do producers better negotiate their deals and their future seasons without having full access to that data? Well, there's new ways of tracking that, and that's what we're going to start talking about today on Global Vid. Hi, Pola. How are you?
Hi, Eric. I'm very well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. So, as I mentioned in my intro, we're going to talk about data today, and we've got three main subtopics. We're going to talk about various approaches to tracking data. We're also going to then, in the second segment, talk a little bit more about your career story as well. And then we're going to go back and give listeners and viewers even more deeper data insight for the entire television and streaming industry. So let's start with various approaches to tracking data. So how has TV been tracked so far?
There is one company that comes to mind immediately when we discuss audience measurement, and that, of course, is Nielsen. Nielsen has been in the business since the beginning of television. They first started measuring radio. I think it started in late 40s of the previous century. And then in the 50s, they started to release TV ratings and top 20s. And I think around 2020, they started releasing top 10s for the streamers. So it's been a journey. Nielsen is I would say, a benchmark when it comes to linear television audience measurement. The challenge here is the size of the panel and the representation. As much as they are trusted and they measure demographic, which of course is necessary for the ad sales, they are not the biggest.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I know that you don't work for Nielsen, but from a very simple point of view, how does Nielsen track TV ratings?
You have to agree to have a box installed in your house near your television, and every panelist gets assigned a profile. And every time you watch something, you have to make sure that the profile that is assigned to you is turned on. So it's your responsibility to measure properly your viewing habits. It's all happening for the ad sales, as I said before. But imagine the situation when you watch a movie on television and there are commercial breaks. Are you actually staying and watching the commercial breaks, or are you going out to make yourself a cup of tea, or you're catching up on the phone or an email? You're not actively watching, and yet your profile sends a signal that you're watching this commercial and this commercial break, not just the program. So this is a thing that, as I said before, it's a bit of a challenge here with Nielsen, and also the sizes of the panel. In Poland, for example, our panel is around 3,500 households, which means it's less than 10,000 people that represent the viewing habits of 40 million people country. Of course, not all those 40 millions have TV access and watch TV, but as you can see, it's not fully representative. It's a small panel representing a big audience.
So if you had different people in a household, how would they track what the father, mother, cousin, whoever lives in that house, the children, etc., how would they track that?
So as I said, you have a number assigned or a profile created that represents you. Your wife would have a different profile. So every time you watch television, you need to specify on this little box that it's you who's watching.
Okay.
So it's a male in their 40s with this kind of education, making that kind of income, living in that kind of size of a city. When your wife wants to watch something else, then she has to make sure that she's the one who's watching. So it's a female with that kind of education, that kind of age bracket, in that kind of city, and so on and so on. So the responsibility for the proper measurement comes down to the honesty of the panelists.
I could just imagine somebody grabbing the remote and not wanting to change that. It's like an extra step to watching TV.
Yeah, let's say you started watching it and then you got bored and you were watching this with your daughter. So you leave the room and your daughter just finding something else, but she doesn't make a change on the remote. So she doesn't change the profile. So it seems like you're watching now Peppa Pig and the Peppa Pig numbers skyrocketing.
Yeah, for my age group. And so now, how is it possible to even track data now with streamers? And this is the real challenge here.
It is quite a challenge, yes. Mostly because of the technology, the need for accuracy. With Nielsen, when you have the box, when you do play according to rules, the data is pretty accurate and it's accessible to every player in the market, and not just in the market, in the industry itself. With the streamers, the platforms do not share their data. So there have to be an alternative, and the alternative have to be created by the outsiders. So Nielsen do measure streaming behavior on the streaming platforms, but it's not as precise because the box, I believe, is attached to a router and you don't have a profile per se, like you do with linear television. But for streamers, demographics don't really matter because it's mostly for the ad sales purposes. So we have to come up with other solutions. So we have surveys, you have independent panels that are created by data companies such as PlumResearch. You have online chatter measurement or tracking, which gives you an idea of the audience demand for a specific genre, an actor, actress, a storyline even. So there are different types to get to the bottom, but the bottom line will differ depending on what methodology you've used.
Right. But the bottom line right now is the fact that the likes of Netflix and other major streamers are just not sharing that data at all. So producers don't have much negotiation power there when it comes to future seasons or even pitches for certain types of projects because they just don't know what those numbers are. Is that the real challenge right now? Is that why people are gravitating towards finding new ways of tracking data?
Absolutely. With linear and with Nielsen, you know what happened with your audience. You know how many people watched your program and when they stopped watching, where they went and where they came from. And everybody has the same data. So if we were to compile top 10 most watched programs in Poland yesterday, everybody would have the same results. With the top 10 of the previous week on Netflix, everybody will have different results, and most likely Netflix would have their own numbers. And I think and they will not share it, or they will do like a very, not detailed, but just overview of what was the top 10. You have the top 10 trending in your country when you open Netflix. That's just on the very surface. The producers or the content owners, they don't know how valuable their content is to the platform. And I think that's where the power is. The information is power, knowledge is power, and money. So if you knew exactly how influential your title is on the platform, how many people watch it, but how many people stay with their subscription on this platform because of your show, then you would have a leverage in your future negotiation. This is where the data companies come in to help evaluate the content and level the playing field for everybody involved.
Okay. And how far along are we now?
We've done very well so far, and I think only way is up. We are present in over 70 countries. We have one of the biggest, if not the biggest panels, independent panels in the industry, in the world. For example, when you compare our panel in the US alone, I think we're talking about more than 300,000 panelists. And any other panel is a percentile of this. This is important because that means that there is a correct or accurate representation of what actually goes on the platform. So our data is so big and so detailed that you can not only know that Squid Game was a massive success, but also what was the consequence of the success of Squid Game, how much it influenced viewership of other South Korean productions, and then what those South Korean productions influence further. Because it doesn't just stop with one title. It has a long tail of influence, and we can tell it by looking into our numbers because it's so much information that we have access to.
So let's leave that on a bit of a cliffhanger so that I can ask you exactly how in the third segment of this show when we go into deeper insights on data, because I'm sure our listeners right now are thinking, well, how are you tracking that data? Let's leave that for last and go into our second segment of this podcast, which is something really important because one of the things that I strive to do is to educate the younger generation of TV executives and just anybody who wants to learn about something new and be inspired. Again, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your career background. And so how did it all get started? Why did you choose television as your career?
I'm a girl who grew up in a small Eastern European village where everything that was happening on television it might as well happen on the moon. It was so far away. So I was captivated by the stories, by the actors, by the costumes, by the music, by acting, by everything. And my family went through some challenging times when I was a kid. So the movies kind of serve as a way out of the darkness.
An escape.
And yes, escape, exactly. And it helped us survive very difficult moments of our lives. And so, and also comedy, which is incredibly close to my heart. And you and I connected the most when we started talking about stand-up and comedy.
That's right. I remember the first time meeting you, I was so surprised that this person from Warsaw in Poland basically knew all the stand-up comedians that one could imagine.
Yeah. So I think that I was just swept off my feet by the magic of cinema. And I always wanted to be an actress. I liked the attention and I thought I was always very funny. Maybe because I had to be, because when you're going through a traumatic experiences, the humor is going to keep you alive. So I wanted to study acting, but it's incredibly difficult. I'm sure everybody knows how difficult it is to get accepted to the acting school. So I thought I'm going to cheat the system, and I started studying the history of film, television, and media culture. And I fell in love. I fell in love with watching movies, analyzing movies, getting to the bottom, understanding why the movie was edited in that way and not the other. I think we've watched Kramer versus Kramer 15 times to understand why the court scene was edited that way. And it was just so incredibly fascinating to me that I stayed and I finished, so now I have a master's degree in film, television, and media culture. And right after university, I went to England, mostly because I wanted to make some money in order to move to New York. I fell in love with New York. I even wrote my master thesis about New York in films of Woody Allen, Martin Scorsese, and Spike Lee. But again, my plans went upside down because I got a job and I became the head of a movie channel. And so I don't know if it was luck or no, it must have been luck. It was a perfect timing.
A little bit of both. It was partly your passion and partly luck. But so what was that role?
It was a program planner for a film channel that was broadcasted in Poland, but broadcasted from the UK. It was just like a wish was granted to me because the ad said, if you're Polish and you love films, we would like to hear from you. Well, That was basically me.
Not so much luck. You're at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I guess. But the luck was being in London at the time of this ad being posted.
Well, here's the thing that I'll just add to that. I mean, at the end of the day, luck happens, but not when you don't go into these situations in the first place. So here you are. You plan to go to London because you had a vision to eventually go to New York, but
Yeah.
still, you're the one who went to London. If you had stayed in Warsaw, you would have never saw this opportunity.
Oh, at the time I wasn't even in Warsaw. I studied in Poznan, so Warsaw was not even on my mind. I
Okay.
just wanted to live. At the time, I think I was in Warsaw maybe twice or three times visiting my sister, who was working as a costume designer for TV series. So
Okay.
this was my first time when I was an extra on medical drama in Poland, which I think, of course, immediately fueled my dreams to become an actor. But at that time, I wasn't thinking of working in Warsaw. I was dead on set on New York, on living in New York. I was a New York kind of girl at
Okay.
that time, I thought at least.
But you didn't end up going to New York. So tell me a little bit more what happened after that, after the movie channel in the UK.
I stayed because, I got so much power. I was the one deciding what people in Poland are going to watch
Mm,
and how they're going to watch it and what kind of fun they're going to have on the weekends, on Valentine's, on Christmas. It was incredibly addictive, I think. I was the crazy person on my way to work that could not stop smiling. I was enchanted. I was just, somebody put a spell on me. I was the happiest person I could have ever imagined. I was like a Jack who found magic beans, just my magic bean was the film channel that I was in charge of, and it was my responsibility.
right.
At that point, New York, who cares about New York? I was having my own New York moment at that time in London.
Sure. Why not? Yeah. And then what came next in your career? Like it doesn't have to be exactly chronological, but what were kind of some of your career highlights as well thereafter?
Then there was a big turn because I went back to Poland. I was given a chance to launch a streaming platform, a VOD platform for one of the cable operators. And this was incredibly empowering experience because I was hired, and this was one of the best bosses I've ever had. Who on my first day, I asked him, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Oh, how do I know? Like, if I knew, I wouldn't hire you. So we have to launch the VOD platform. I don't know how. You know how. So you just tell me what you need. I'm gonna be here supporting you all the way, but it's your baby. You do it." So the credit of trust and the faith that was put in me, it was just, they say Red Bull gives you wings. At
Mm-hmm.
that time, that boss gave me wings like nobody else before. I launched a platform, a VOD platform from scratch. It's a proud moment because a lot of other companies copied the solutions that I created. When you live in different parts of Poland and you have other cable operators and you have their VOD platforms, when you look at the user experience, this is how I design it. So that's pretty cool, I think.
I think you just gave some great advice to aspiring leaders and bosses in the future, is that don't be shy to hire people that know more than you about a specific topic, that might even be smarter than you, and let them do their job and get out of the way. Just give them the tools that what they need to do, but then get out of their way so that they can shine as much as possible. Not always easy to do, especially for younger bosses, but the best way is to let your team work their magic.
Thanks. I think the managers have a lot of expectations that coming from upper levels, so it's not always easy to trust and completely allow people that you hire do what they feel is the best. You feel like you need to monitor it because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility. But if you're going to hire someone and not fully trust them, then it's not the person for
Mm.
you. You have to hire someone that you will trust. And loyalty, for me at least, loyalty is a big deal. So that trust that someone put in me turned my loyalty to 100 on the day one.
And the other thing that I see in that boss is that ultimately they were highly courageous and confident in themselves. So now I've known you as well, that you've worked in different roles, and that your last role was at Comedy Central as well. Now, but let's skip over that for a second and go straight to PlumResearch, because this is a kind of a change for you in some ways. So how did you land this PlumResearch role?
I've always been very curious of the correlation and causation of the popularity of certain shows or the reception of movies and TV programming. And so I was very curious, and I was the one who was digging very deep into data insights when I was working on linear channels. It was my drug. Every day I had to check what happened, why it happened, try to understand and get as much information as I possibly could about my core audience. I wanted to speak directly to my dedicated audience. I believe one of the biggest currencies is time. So if someone chooses to spend time with your channel, this is so generous, so you should reward that. So in order to reward that, you have to know as much as you possibly can. Even though I was always on the content side, on the programming side, on an acquisition side, on a commercial side, I wouldn't be able to move or make any right decisions without access to data. And numbers may not be the sexiest side of the business, but it sure does make the world go round. And so when I found out about this company called PlumResearch and the fact that it's a Polish startup, it's led by Łukasz Jeziorski, who's also a member of the International Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, I was so convinced that I need to be a part of this company. And I love what they're doing. I support it, and I feel they're bringing a lot of value to the industry. And as I said before, we are leveling the playing field for the content creators and content buyers, the bigger and the smaller.
So perfect transition to come back to deeper insights into data. And we've already established that right now in this new streaming age, that there is a lack of transparency. The streamers hold all the cards right now and all the power in terms of how well things are really doing and why they're making the decisions. So what is PlumResearch doing right now to accurately track that data?
We make sure that every platform that we are measuring has an appropriate sized panel, because we believe that numbers or the size of the panel must be fully representative of the country that the panels are from. We try to make the panels as big as possible. We're trying to constantly improve our presence in given countries. I told you before, we are available in over 70 countries. I think it's close to 75. So we try to make sure our data is as reliable as it possibly can. And we do have a feedback coming from our clients that when they compare our top 10s or our insight to their internal information, it's incredibly close. We're constantly working on improvement, on increasing our panel size, and on different aspects and metrics. Let's say one metrics that is my absolute favorite, that I think also shows the value of content. It's something that we called reactivation. That means that we can measure the power and influence of a content. I mentioned it before. I can tell you how many, let's say, subscribers that were inactive in the previous 30 days, Squid Game activated, re-engaged.
In that case, what does an active member viewer mean?
An active subscriber is a subscriber that haven't watched anything for the past 30 days. And this is a very important thing, because when you look at the recent conversation that happens, there's a big focus on a churn and how much subscribers these platforms are losing. So because now the competition is growing. Before, you mostly had Netflix. In the US, of course, you had Hulu. At some point, you had, Amazon Prime, and then HBO, and so on and so on. But now you have Peacock, you have Disney, you have all these other platforms that are popping up, and you don't have to stick with one. But of course, the costs of living are going high for everybody now. So at some point, you're going to have to make a choice. Which one are you going to stick to? So if we can show to the content owners, to the content producers, that your show kept the subscriber base for this platform, that means that your content is incredibly important and valuable, which is a big tool in your upcoming negotiations.
So you just mentioned churn, and that's a hot topic in the industry, especially with the streamers. Some have very high turnover. I think before this call, I mentioned the World Wrestling Entertainment Association, which has extremely high churn because people come for the events and then they leave. And then others have more moderate churn. So it's a big issue, especially now as we're going into 2023 and thinking about a potential recession that might come into play. And so who knows? So how is that being addressed by the streamers? How can they improve that scenario or make sure that their churn stays low?
Right. So I think one of the things that are already happening, and you can see it, is changed approach to scheduling and releases. Today, I just watched the second half of Harry and Meghan docuseries, and it's just 6 episodes, and yet they split it into 2 releases. Ted Lasso initially was released all in once, and Netflix was, I think, first platform that was releasing the entire seasons at once. So people were binging it, and there was a conversation going on, and there were lots of chatter online. But what's the value for Apple if you can watch Ted Lasso in 1 day or 2 days and then unsubscribe, or not even, you're doing it during your free trial, and then you're not gonna buy the subscription. So the second season of Ted Lasso, the second season of The Morning Show, was released on a typical linear traditional way, 1 episode per week. So this is also fighting churn, or at least it's a first solution for now. But I think the deep analysis of your audience preferences, of how everything is connected, is necessary on the side of the platforms. And that's also where PlumResearch comes in. We not only support producers and content owners to help them understand their value, but we also support platforms to understand their strengths and to help them address their weaknesses. And we can advise on the scheduling deadlines or timeline. We can measure the engagement or viewership of certain episodes. Sometimes we will advise to change the release order of certain episodes, which will keep your attention and keep this engagement on the side of your subscribers. There's a lot of conversation going on the subject of attention economy. Now we're getting into the conversation of loyalty economy, because you need to find a way to keep your subscriber base engaged, satisfied, and appreciated. And we can help with that. PlumResearch can definitely help with understanding what is important for your audience, or what is important for the audience of your competition. So because that also is an incredible, valuable insight.
You know what, too? It all comes back to data and the lack of transparency, because Netflix has a reason and data that probably demonstrated this was the best way to go, to release 3 episodes 1 week and 3 episodes the next, as to not divulge the exact date of this recording.
I'm sorry, it is my fault. I didn't know it was a secret. But of course, every decision, whether it's on a linear channel or a streaming platform, is dictated by the numbers that the executives are looking at.
So to wrap this up, let's look at the main takeaways here and why data is important not only for producers, but also the buyers of said content.
I strongly believe that knowledge is power and money. So as much information as you can get, you can use it to your advantage. So for platforms, if you can go to granular data, very detailed information on how the content is doing on your platform, or how content is doing on your competition platforms and in your territory of interest, you need to have access to this information to make your product better and to answer the demands of audience. These numbers that Plum provides, it's not assumption, is not measuring online chatter, which can be skewed by different PR budgets and marketing budgets.
Right.
We're not relying on any surveys where you can underreport something or make yourself look smarter and just report that you've been watching, all the
greatest documentaries in the world rather than the trash content you probably are watching.
Exactly. We have actual data, independent data, because we need to have our core interest is reliable data representative to what actually goes on streaming platforms internationally and locally. For the producers, content owners, distributors, this is power in negotiation. This is actual understanding of the value of your real value of your content, of your production. It gives you tools to negotiate better, to get more out of the deals that you're making. And the other side that I feel needs to be addressed as well, and it's very rarely discussed in public, is that opinion of audiences matter. So if you ever in a position to become a Nielsen panelist, to become a panelist for any other company that measures viewership on the streaming platforms, agree to that, because representations matters. And if you choose that you want to see more documentaries on nature or more educational documentaries on the subject that is important to you, but you're not seeing it, it's because there is no data supporting this need. So audience need to be aware that decisions are made based on numbers, and the numbers represent real people. So real people have actual power to dictate what needs to be on the platforms, on the TV channels. And I think it's important to use your voice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, without necessarily targeting which demographic might gravitate towards being a panelist or not, there might be a certain demographic of the viewership that will just tend to say no. And then that entire segment of the population doesn't get tracked. Pola, it has been a pleasure to speak with you today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, by the way.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
I really learned a lot about data today and why it's important. And I think what's great right now is that there's a company like yours that are trying to break that, I don't know, that firewall of sorts, to get that data that for what the viewers are actually watching on these streaming platforms. And I think we'll be better for it in the long run. So thank you very much.
So, yes. Thank you.
This has been the Global Vid Podcast. Thanks to my guest Pola Hempowicz of PlumResearch, plus our show editor Nicole Almeida and theme song composers Amber Goodwin and Aaron Ross. To support the show, please subscribe and see the episode description for more details. Thanks for listening.